Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. The controversy over Tibet is set to intensify. The US Congress has passed the Resolve Tibet Act that urges Beijing to re-engage with Tibetan leaders for a peaceful resolution of their dispute with China. Now, the act is expected to be signed by President Joe Biden soon. And on the 19th of June, a high-level US congressional delegation visited Dharamsala and met the Dalai Lama. Now, the Dalai Lama is in the United States even as we speak. Whether China likes it or not, the Tibetan issue has already been reopened, and the US is geared to use the Tibet controversy to embarrass the Chinese leadership. So we are asking these 5 big questions. Why is the US motivated to play the Tibet card? The two countries, the US and China, are dangerously locked in a new great power rivalry over trade, technology, and security. So, how much will be used to pressure China, and what will its fallout be in Taiwan? How is the succession to the Dalai Lama decided? And finally, will India change its stance on Tibet? And China's move on Arunachal Pradesh. China understands that the Dalai Lama could well be reincarnated in Taiwan, hence it's stepped up its claims to Arunachal Pradesh. Joining me to discuss these big questions are Tibetologist Claude Arpi, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, and my colleague Deepak Badana, who continues to join us at the News9 Plus studio. Claude, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you.
I must start by asking you this. Is the United States stepping up pressure on China over Tibet, even as China looks to grab Taiwan by whatever means necessary? Is this a quid pro quo, as they call it in the military?
I think it's a quid pro quo. I think they're putting pressure everywhere. The US, they have put recently, the last few years on Xinjiang, on the human rights.
Yes.
Saying that 1 million of Uyghurs were in captivity in their own country. They are putting on Tibet now. And I think because there's a huge confrontation, who will be the leader of the world in 5 or 10 years. So China is trying to assert itself. China is threatening more and more Taiwan. China has whatever they had promised for the Hong Kong, with the one country, two system, they have not kept that promise. So slowly China is trying to assert in the region, and this, of course, the United States do not agree. And there's also the economic confrontation that you just mentioned. So Tibet is certainly a card. The name card is not very nice. But it's something, one of the factors with which the US can put pressure. And now they have passed this new law. It will be signed very soon by President Biden. So that will be more pressure. Now, how far it can be implemented is another issue. But I think probably the United States just want to put pressure, even if it's not implemented immediately.
Right.
But as you mentioned, the delegation of the Congress, the bipartisan delegation, came with Miss Nancy Pelosi. And whenever Miss Nancy Pelosi travels somewhere, there is always patakas, and there was in Dharamsala. She made very strong statement against President Xi Jinping. So I think it's part of the game, and let's see where it leads. But certainly for the Tibetan people, it gives them hope that they have not been completely forgotten. That is, I think, important.
It's given the Tibetan people hope, Claude, certainly. And the big question here is that, has India changed its stance over Tibet? Because if you see in 2014, the Prime Minister of Tibet was an invitee for Prime Minister Modi's swearing in. In 2019, he was not. And from 2021 onwards, that is post our standoff with China in Ladakh, the government of India has started quietly bringing the Tibet issue back to front and center. Do you see any big change in the government's Tibet policy, even as China steps up pressure along the Himalayas?
Yes, certainly. That, as you mentioned, Sikyong Lobsang Sangye attended the swearing ceremony in 2014. But we should not forget that in 2018, the government circulated a note saying that no government official should meet the Dalai Lama or the Sikyong in Dharamsala. And that was really to please China. And this was after the Doklam incident. And later on, the COVID came, and everyone knew that it was coming from China. So people start viewing China very differently, though in 2019, no Tibetan officials were invited for the swearing ceremony. Of course, after May 2020, and when out of the blue, I could say, China attacked India in 5 places in eastern Ladakh, in Delsang, Demchok, Galwan, Gogra Hot Spring, and in the Figure area on the lake. Everything changed, and the view in Delhi started being a little bit different. I would not say that the policy has completely changed, because there's always a tendency not to want to rock the boat. Rocking the boat, it was an expression used by the Western diplomat in 1950 when Tibet was invaded. Everyone knew that Tibet was an independent country. It's what the recent US act reiterates. The British themselves in 1949, in December 49, they passed a resolution in their house stating the same thing, that Tibet is a de facto independent nation, but at the same time, nobody wanted rock the boat, as the American diplomat put it. So now slowly India and the Americans have started. Nancy Pelosi have rocked the boat in Dharamsala. More importantly, I think, or as importantly, Prime Minister Modi received the delegation, and Mr. Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor, was in attendance, which is quite a sign that something is changing. Now, how far it will change is very difficult to guess, because the situation in the parliament is different than it was in the previous parliament. But let's see, because ultimately it is in India's interest at least to gently rock the boat. I would not say to declare Tibet an independent nation or to follow the way they have passed that new act, but at least to gently rock the boat and to make sure that the immigration of Tibetan people from India to America stops.
Right.
So, because it's a huge problem. It's a big problem that India has to face, and India needs the goodwill of the Tibetan. India needs the Tibetan to stay in India. If all the Tibetan leaves for America or the West, it's nothing. India will not gain anything in it. That.
Right. Pramit Pal Chaudhary now joins us. Pramit, what are you making of the US moves on Tibet? Last couple of days, there's been the Tibet Act, the Resolve Tibet Act, the US congressional delegation visiting here, Nancy Pelosi. And as Claude just said, wherever Nancy Pelosi moves, there's lots of patakas. And of course, Prime Minister Modi and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval meeting the delegation. Lots of signaling there. Is India finally rocking the boat with China over the Tibet question?
I think the game has always been, we've always wanted the Americans to be more active on Tibet. Pelosi has always been a very ardent supporter of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan cause. In fact, in many ways, she's been a bit unusual in the degree of interest she has in the cause. Now, her position is, should we say, less important because she's no longer speaker. But what she is a very close friend of Joe Biden, the president.
Right.
When she went to Taiwan, she made it very clear, I am not going to listen to the State Department. I will only not go if Joe tells me not to go. Joe never sent that message. And I'm sure in this case she consulted with the president, even if the State Department may have had a different point of view. So what we're seeing here in many ways is the political system, not the administrative system of America. In other words, none of this is State Department, none of this is the National Security Council. This is all congressional action that's taking place. And this reflects, one, I think, the increasingly strong stance taken by both the left of the Democratic Party and the right of the Republican against China. In many ways ahead of their government in actual policy. Second, it also reflects, I suspect,
Claude, this point that Pramit made about the succession to the Dalai Lama, that's possibly the most contentious, succession anywhere in the world, possibly, because given the number of great powers that are interested in this, China certainly, India and the United States, this triangle of big powers. Tell us how the succession is going to be decided, Claude, when it actually comes, when it comes to that the Dalai Lama's time would have passed and the Tibetan people will need a leadership, a new Dalai Lama. How will they choose the 15th Dalai Lama?
That is up to the Dalai Lama to decide. It's certainly not about China would like to decide. China says that they have always decided, but it's not correct. Dalai Lama has to decide. The present Dalai Lama has to decide. He said in 2011, he gave a long statement, and he said that I will tell officially when I am 90. Now, next month he'll be 89, so we can hope that he will say something about it. Now, there is two possibilities. One is the traditional reincarnation, and the other one is an emanation. An emanation means to select a boy who will be groomed and initiated by the Dalai Lama, but will be already born during the lifetime of the Dalai Lama. The issue of the reincarnation, I've always mentioned it, and I've written a lot about it, that there's a gap of 20 years minimum between the time the boy is reincarnated and the time the boy is able to rule. And it has the weakness of the Tibetan system in the 19th century, when China gained a lot of influence in Tibet. In my opinion, it was due to the fact that no Dalai Lama, the 5 consecutive Dalai Lama passed away before the age of 20. So there was no Dalai Lama who could rule the Tibetan nation. And that has brought a lot of weaknesses in the system of governance, and which has resulted partially in what has happened later, the invasion of Tibet. So this the Dalai Lama has to decide, and it's certainly not the Beijing. Delhi cannot decide, but Delhi has a lot of concerns vis-à-vis the population, the Buddhist population in the north. You have seen today the reception the Dalai Lama gets when he arrived in New York. But also when he left Dharamsala, there was a farewell, very large, the entire population of Dharamsala was there. But the same worshipping of His Holiness is there in the Himalayan region, and it concerns India.
Yes, so, Claude, so very quickly, related to the point that you made about the popularity of the Dalai Lama along the Himalayan region, China has been very aggressively claiming Arunachal Pradesh, which it regards as southern Tibet, and it's also staked claim to Tawang, the monastery there, and the town. Is this related somewhat to the possibility that there could be a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama in Arunachal Pradesh and in Tawang, and that's the reason that China is making a play for this territory?
The claim over Tawang and that entire what is today Arunachal Pradesh is very old. I mean, it dates from 1938-39 when the nationalist government created a new province called Xikang, and in the maps that they produced, they englobed Nifa at that time. And the British, of course, protested, but they kept it on this map. And when Mao Zedong in 1950 invaded Tibet, he discovered that there's old map from the nationalist government, and he asked this map should be distributed, and from then onwards, it will be our claim. But recently, they have put more pressure. But of course, they can't do much about it except to claim. But India also could claim some places, for example, small town called Minsar in western Tibet, which very clearly is historically has been part of GNK since 17th century. So if they want to play that game, and also it has been mentioned that some renaming of some places in Tibet will be done by government of India. We have not seen the name as yet, but if they play that game, India also could play that game. But for that,
yes.
we decided that we want to go ahead and not to be bullied each time.
Right, not to be bullied each time, certainly, and that's the government of India there, no pushover when it comes to China, especially in the last 4 years, as we've seen, Deepak. The government seems to have stood up very resolutely to China and, called its bluff along the border.
I think, one thing about this conversation that we just had, which struck me, was about the issue of the Dalai Lama's reincarnation. Now, Mr. RP could correct me, but the Dalai Lama has also spoken of the possibility that he may not reincarnate at all.
Or he might be born as a lady.
As a lady.
Yes.
Now, this is important because let's look at the real politic in play. Should the Dalai Lama pass away, China is bound to put forth a contender, pretender, who they will say is their Dalai Lama. This happened similarly with the Panchen Lama.
Panchen Lama.
The 5-year-old Panchen Lama has disappeared, and now there is another person who claims to be the same, to be the Chinese Panchen Lama.
Yes.
So this is very much a possibility. I would like to hear Mr. RP's reflections on this.
I think it's not a possibility, it's a certitude. There'll be a Chinese Panchen Lama. They put everything in place with their selected Panchen Lama, Gyatsen Nobu. They will say he is the one who has to decide. They have a sacred lake in Tibet called Lamoy Latso, where usually the regent of the Panchen Lama has a vision and they see where the Dalai Lama is reborn. The Chinese Panchen Lama will go to that lake. He has already visited. I found some photos of him visiting that lake, and they will say he has decided that, he has seen, he has a vision that the Dalai Lama is born in Tibet, and this will for sure happen. So the question is not no Dalai Lama, there will be for certain Chinese Dalai Lama. Right. So the Tibetan people, India, the world needs one true Dalai Lama, which will be born in a free country. It's something that the Dalai Lama has always said. He has joked about a girl becoming Dalai Lama or this, or no Dalai Lama, but he has always said that he will be reborn in a free country. So that should be, otherwise that will be, they will. We have today 2 Panchen Lama, both are in the hands of China. So.
Right. Important, interesting retelling, Claude, of the geopolitics and the religious forces that are at play over here, because it's one of the most sensitive regions in the world. 2 nuclear powers sharing a 4,000-kilometer boundary that's unresolved and unsettled, and in the middle of it you have the Tibetan people who've been struggling for their very existence and the future of their culture. But thanks very much for illuminating us on this very, very pressing global topic at the moment, Deepak. Thanks very much for joining us. My colleague Deepak Badana. Biden's Tibet card, that's a story that we've been tracking over the last couple of days, even as the Dalai Lama travels to the United States and possibly meets senior members of the US political system. Israel says it's ended major combat operations against Hamas in the south. Now, there are strong indications that its next battle will be with Hezbollah to the north. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah has threatened a battle with no limitations, no rules, and no ceilings. Israeli officials say the country is ready for an all-out war, and it's approved plans for an offensive against Hezbollah. Now, if this happens, this will not be like the Hamas-Israel conflict. Israel's sophisticated air defense systems will be overwhelmed by Hezbollah's firepower. Hezbollah is believed to have 100,000 rockets and swarms of suicide drones. In fact, it's believed that Hezbollah can bombard Israel for 30 straight days with its arsenal. So we are asking today, will Israel strike at Hezbollah? And will Iran join this battle as it says it will? Will this trigger a wider war? Can the Biden administration play a crucial role in averting the war? What happens to India's investment in the Haifa port? And finally, will American and French mediators bring Israel to talk to Hezbollah? Joining me to discuss this today are Ambassador S.R. Tayal, Dr. Zakir Hussain, and in the studio is my colleague Deepak Badana. Gentlemen, welcome to the News 9 Plus show. Ambassador Tayal, I want to start by asking you this. Does it appear to you, given the ramping up of violence in northern Israel over the last couple of days and the heated statements that are coming out of both Israel and Hezbollah, that war is inevitable now?
The objective of Israel government, and particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu's government at the present time, is annihilation of Hamas, that they are totally destroyed, and they want to make sure that there is no two-state solution ever for the Israel-Palestine conflict by strangling West Bank and whatever Palestinian Authority is left. Now, war is going on since October in Gaza,
Right.
and with a lot of border issues with Lebanon. Israel has repeatedly provoked Iran
Right.
by murdering, assassinating its generals, its scientists, both within Iran, in Iraq, as well as by attacking its embassy in Syria. But we saw that Iran's response was there, but very calibrated, when it attacked Israel with missiles, etc. And it is generally believed that a fair advice was given to US, so that it was like a kushti, which was not real kushti. So Iran does not want a war at present moment. It has enough troubles of its own. Its president has died. The elections are due. Israel is in a very aggressive mood, in a very belligerent mood, and particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu has that personality of winner takes all and give absolutely nothing to the Palestinians.
Dr. Zakir
But
Hussain, I'm going to bring in
American,
Ambassador Tayal.
let me just complete here.
Yes, please.
America also does not want Israel to continue on that path. And recently, yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu complained that the high-power ammunitions are not being given by US to Israel. Without Israel, without United States full support, Israel will not be able to wage a war with Lebanon. So I think ultimately situation should stabilize, but these are dangerous moments.
These are dangerous moments indeed. And Dr. Zakir Hussain, the fact that there are a lot of rhetoric coming from both sides, increasingly belligerent tone from both Israel and from Hezbollah, does it appear to you that war seems inevitable, or as Ambassador Tayal said, that they're going to pause because it's not in the interests of the United States to have Israel go to war with Hezbollah and Lebanon?
It is very tough to say that war is going to pause now, because Netanyahu is in a very binding position, because if he stops war, he is being challenged in its home country. And a couple of days back, there was the largest protest against Netanyahu and war. And what to me seems that Netanyahu wants to engage America once again. That's why he started rhetoric against Hezbollah. But at this time, Hezbollah is well prepared. He has shown the drone mapping and all these things that
Yes.
war will be no limit. There will be a total war.
Right.
And if this happens, then situation will be very crucial. And US has to consider on two grounds. Number one, if Biden continues to support Netanyahu, it means it is going to affect his election. Already Trump is at a higher plank. And second,
Yes.
the entire region will be in chaos because Iran will not wait for, because Hezbollah and all these asymmetric forces are the powerful agencies of Iran.
Right.
If these agencies are decimated, then Iran will be alone to face the situation.
Yes.
And this situation is very volatile. And now I feel that the leaders of US and world leaders, United Nations, everybody should intervene and take some cognizance of these issues.
Right.
Because this is to create a very massive calamity in the region.
Absolutely.
Already, and it is not said, it is not proved that Hamas has been decimated. Again, we may anytime Hamas may fire a barrage of rockets.
Yes.
So what is the problem with Netanyahu? Netanyahu has two problems. One, domestic problem. Another, he cannot face two asymmetric forces at both the
Yes.
sides. It can sandwich Israel. So
Right.
to my understanding, this is a very critical position. In this, people's diplomacy, leaders' diplomacy, Arab countries' diplomacy should intervene and come out with a satisfying solution to both the parties.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Zakir Hussain. Deepak, tense, very volatile situation there, and it just looks like, I mean, given the kind of rhetoric on both sides, it's just like one spark could set things ablaze, looking at the kind of situation we are in the Middle East.
I think there's two ways to look at it. So if you look at the last 10 years, barring these 2006,
Yeah.
when there was a military intervention, and October 7, you'll find that both Iran and Mr. Netanyahu, they benefit from tensions.
Yes.
Their own constituencies, stayed together, and they're able to, gain power.
Right.
On the flip side, should it spark something like a wider regional conflagration, I think it's not just the Middle East, but India itself and the wider region
Yes.
that is going to face a lot of ramifications.
Right. Wider ramifications there, but let's bring in the military expert, Deepak. This Major General Datta joins us now. General Datta, Netanyahu under a lot of pressure, both at home and overseas. He's says he's stopped major operations against Hamas. Do you think this is the time that he will actually wheel north and hit Hezbollah and create that buffer zone between him and Lebanon? I mean, bear in mind that Hezbollah and Israel have been fighting a proxy war for the last 9 months. It's been a low intensity conflict, but now both sides are promising an all-out war, as it appears. You studied the Israel-Lebanon war of 2006. Tell us what it looks like at the moment right now, 2024.
Yeah, Sandeep, if you take the overall picture about the situation in the entire West, that is the Middle East now, as far as Israel is concerned, the aim of Netanyahu was to destroy Hamas fully and not stop the operations without fully decimating Hamas.
Right.
And to that extent, they made that objective, and they continued carrying out the operations from north of Gaza and now down to south in Rafah. Now, as Rafah stands and what we see, what is happening on the ground, 2/3 of Rafah has actually been captured by the Israeli IDF. And they are now carrying out the mopping up and clearing of that area, which has now been cleared in Rafah itself, per se. Now, while they were carrying out these operations against the Hamas in Rafah, there was a lot of international pressure. You are aware of that, and we have been seeing the various forums actually trying to put pressure on Israel to stop the operations against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But as far as Netanyahu is concerned, their aim of decimating Hamas is concerned, they will not stop until they achieve a viable victory against Hamas. Because if you leave Hamas, all this sacrifice of the Israeli forces and the lives which have been lost in Gaza itself, more than about 36 to 37,000 people, including the militants of the Hamas and the civilians, you cannot now stop an operation after such a lot of water has flown.
Right.
As far as Hezbollah is concerned, they are actually working as a proxy of Iran. And while Iran tried a direct assault on Israel and Israel counterattacked, and then maybe both the countries have realized that a direct confrontation between two nation states is going to be a problem and will escalate into a much larger conflict. So therefore, they are reverted back into the proxy war situation, especially by Iran.
Right.
And Iran now, with the help of Hezbollah, is carrying out strikes against northern Israel,
Right.
trying to target the Israeli settlements and the Israeli defense forces in that entire area. As far as Israel is concerned, Israel had made it very clear to Hezbollah and to Lebanon that if you carry out strikes against our civilian targets
Yes.
in northern Israel, they will be left with no option but to carry out an all-out operation and a
Right.
war against Lebanon and Hezbollah in the north. And therefore, the Israeli special forces had already mustered their forces. As far as the land forces are concerned, the mechanized columns are concerned, the armor and the APCs are concerned, their air assets and the anti-air and anti-drone, anti-missile assets have been moved to the north. Because as far as Hezbollah is concerned, they will use the stockpile of missiles which are there with them,
Yes.
which runs into thousands of numbers. But that doesn't worry Israel at all. Because the moment that salvo starts, Israel will be carrying out massive strikes on the targets against Hezbollah and strike within Lebanon wherever they pick up a target.
Right.
So therefore, now as we look at it, the overall scenario would be that if Hezbollah, and if you recollect the video, they had taken out a 9-minute video showing all the targets of the Israelis in northern Israel and what the Hezbollah was planning to target. And the Israelis already warned them that if you are trying to create a psychological hype and you think you will be able to strike these targets while you have definitely taken out an aerial reconnaissance and you have
Yes.
recorded these targets, we will hit you back in a very big way.
Right.
So
Right.
I look at it in a different manner, that while Hamas has been curtailed in Rafah and in Gaza, if Hezbollah escalates it any further, Israel is mentally and physically prepared to strike back Hezbollah and Lebanon if need be. And
Right.
once that happens, and the other players jump in, well, you are aware of the other players, whether they are Houthis again by proxy,
Yes.
by Iran's proxies, or the other groups within Syria, Israelis will strike back.
Israelis
they
will
have
strike
already-
back. General Datta, thanks very much for that insight into the possible military situation that will unfold there, that could possibly unfold there. But Ambassador Tayal, General Datta made that point about the reconnaissance videos that were released by Hezbollah recently, and among the targets that Hezbollah wrecked with their drones was the port of Haifa. Now, that's just 27 kilometers from the Lebanon border. And Haifa port, as we all know, is a very key part of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. It was taken over by Mr. Gautam Adani. He's running that in a consortium which unfortunately hasn't taken off because of the violence. But do you think a possible war or prolonged conflict or tensions like this actually impact Haifa port, which is very crucial to the IMEC corridor?
If there is a real all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel, then certainly Haifa port will be attacked.
Right.
Now, by Lebanon, by Hezbollah, not Lebanon, Hezbollah. But how much they will be able to penetrate the Iron Dome and all kinds of defenses which Israel has, and that only a future will tell. But my own sense is that, see, India is trying to have different connectivity projects.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they are all running into some difficulty. Our trilateral highway with East Asia, because
Yes.
of whole kind of problems in Myanmar, it is not going forward.
Right.
India North-South transport corridor through Iran and Russia
Yes.
to Europe that is also unable to go forward because of
Right.
Iran, and now Russia is in the sanctions. So these are all very long-term projects. These
Yes.
projects, like, it's a very ambitious, very audacious project, the
Right.
India Middle East Europe corridor. And yes, at that time, after Abraham Accords and Israel UAE agreements, and at one point even Israel Saudi Arabia, there seemed
Yes.
that there will be some agreement. And on those times, it looked a very practical project, a very
Right.
possible project. But at present, it seems very, very difficult. And in Haifa, Mr. Adani has one port, and his investment will be very limited as compared to investment of other
Yes.
parties and Israel's own exports and imports, etc. So yes, it is a setback to him, but I think Mr. Adani and the group is playing for long-term stakes,
Yes.
and these projects take time.
Yes, absolutely. These projects take time, and Deepak, interesting point that Ambassador Tayal mentioned, the fact that all our connectivity projects, they seem to be, they've run afoul of the geopolitics and wars and tensions. You reported on that, right?
Yeah, so yes, actually he's been talking about the Kaladan project,
Kaladan
the
project,
Sitwe, port that India's been
Myanmar to
working
the
on.
east,
Exactly.
IMEC, INSTC, every single project, and even the traditional route via the Red Sea.
See, I think this has less to do with India,
Yeah.
and more to do with how strategic a position India happens to occupy.
Yes.
Now, this is the one country that stands between the east and the far west.
Right.
Right. Everything that, say, as much as say 1/3 of the global trade just passes through the Suez Canal.
Yes.
Which then has to pass by India and towards the Strait of Malacca. Now, as a nation in such a strategic geopolitical space, India must deal with the problems that will happen.
Yeah, the problems, as you mentioned, Dr. Zakir Hussain, the Haifa port, that is India's skin in the game, is it not? With, it's like bang in the middle of this conflict zone between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon. How much of a setback would it be dealt with if there was indeed a spillover of the conflict to the north?
To me, this project is more than business.
Right.
We have to understand that this is strategic business. It's a strategic port, strengthening bilateral relations, and everybody thinks that this war is not going to continue longer. Sometime it has to be settled,
Yes.
either in favor of Israel, which has still upper hand, and on the other hand, there will be a balancing view in it. But to my understanding, that India needs multimodal transport corridors.
Right.
This is very important for our growing economy. We are going to be third economy, fifth, fourth, third. If US and Russia downfall, then we may become second. What is happening to us that we need export market as well as energy.
Yes.
We need multimodal transport corridors, and we are trying on it. It is a medium to long-term project, and in the coming years, country will realize that the connectivity is the artery of their growth and development.
Right.
So our efforts, right now, many people suspect, many people have doubt, and they are telling that it is problematic everywhere, but this is future. And we have to do all these things. And right now, if war extends, Haifa Adani, who has invested $1.2 billion, his share is gone down to 7%, and it may further decline. But rating agencies are giving their best to stabilize the share prices of Adani Group. And what is important to say that Haifa is contributing only 3% of the total turnover of Adani port. So, particular with Haifa, it's okay. It is going to be a problematic. But for Adani as a company, it is not going to impact much. It must depend on the domestic economy of India. Haifa, its rating and all these things depends on domestic performance of our economy. So what I think that Hezbollah, I doubt that Hezbollah will try to target Haifa, because just near to Haifa is Ashdod.
Yes.
Ashdod plays a very key role. It may target to this port, and Haifa automatically will die out. So, to my understanding, the major focus should be how to restore peace in the region. Haifa is our first attempt in that region
Yes.
to promote IMEC because we cannot rely on Suez Canal.
Yes.
Suez, through which our $2 billion trade goes to and fro, which connects East and West market. And now we are also planning to import coal from Russia from that route. So we cannot rely on Suez Canal, whose problem started since 1958, when there was war between Nasser and Israel and France and Britain. So we cannot rely on one artery for trade. Our trade with this region is growing, and we are trying to send our commodities up to Latin America, Northern American coast, and all the North African countries. Coastal countries are our big markets.
Yes.
So at this time, people may suspect on it, but in medium to long term, it is going to succeed.
It is going to succeed indeed. And I'm going to bring General Datta in for a closing comment here. General Datta, of course, we all hope for peace, that better sense prevails in this very volatile part of the world. But do you think that given the fact that you have both Iran going to elections and the United States, two very key players in this whole game, given the fact that they are going to see elections, very crucial presidential elections this year, you think the possibility that there could be peace in Lebanon and between Lebanon and Israel, is that a distinct possibility, you think? That they would actually force both sides to pull back from the brink and they won't be fighting of the kind that both sides are threatening? There will be all-out war, for instance.
You are right, Sandeep. If you see the political scenario, whether it is Israel by itself, what is happening in the US for the elections which are upcoming now, and what is going to happen in Iran. So all these three countries are politically affected by the future of the current leadership,
Yes.
which is there. To a lesser extent in Iran, because after the death of the president, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the supreme leader, still remains. So it will be actually an election of the presidential candidate.
Yes.
Whereas in US and in Israel, the future will depend upon how they handle this situation between the fighting elements. As far as the situation in Hamas is concerned, whether a ceasefire can be achieved, whether the international community, which is putting pressure on the US also to bring a ceasefire about. There have been a number of meetings in Beirut also recently, and America continues to try and find a ceasefire and a acceptable solution to Israel and Hamas, and of course to Hezbollah and Iran as a combination. But what I personally feel, while this continues as a political backdrop, whatever is the outcome is going to happen as per the ground situation in Israel, in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, whether Israel is able to achieve its aim or not. Because that is the focus. Israel will not stop till the time they have achieved the aim, irrespective of the International Court of Justice and whatever pressure is coming to them. If you kill one and you kill 10, the punishment is going to be the same. So Israel is not bothered about that pressure. Israel is more bothered about the future consequences of this war. Will they be able to achieve peace in the coming decades to come now?
Yes.
Will Hamas stop doing what they're doing? Will the Palestinians accept the existence of Israel? And the Iranians will also accept that, yeah, Israel has to exist and to come to a solution and have an understanding at an international forum. And the next is the use of United Nations, the UNIFIL, and of course, a buffer zone, which is already existing there, was existing, and the UN troops are still there. So are the Indians, which are the part of the UN delegation there. So the time will tell. One wrong move by Hezbollah, one escalation to a next level will again snowball the entire situation, and neither the Israelis nor the Iranians will be able to control it thereafter.
Absolutely. One wrong move, as they say.
Solution.
Yes, thank you very much, General Datta. One wrong move, Deepak, and the whole region could spiral into another cycle of violence and counter-violence. But thank you very much, General Datta, Dr. Zakir Hussain, Ambassador Tayal, for joining us this evening to talk about a possibility of an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. June 23rd was the 39th anniversary of the Air India bombing by Canadian-based Khalistani terrorists. 329 people were killed, 280 of them were Canadians of Indian origin. Kanishka Flight 182 exploded 45 minutes before it was to have landed at London's Heathrow Airport. 39 years later, as people gathered to remember those who had lost their lives, Canadian Khalistani supporters tried to disrupt the memorial service in Toronto. Daniel Broadman, a journalist who was there at the service to support the victims' families, tells us what happened when the Khalistanis tried to harass the people who had gathered there. Have a listen.
Daniel, I want to start by asking you, yesterday was June 23rd, and it's the National Remembrance Day in Canada. I wanted you to, first of all, tell me what happened yesterday in Canada.
Thanks for having me. It was the National Day for Remembrance of Victims of Terror, and it coincided June 23rd, as you know, with the Air India bombing, the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history. We lost 280 Canadians on a flight, 329 innocent civilians were murdered by Khalistani terrorists. So there was a memorial plan. There was a memorial at Queen's Park, the Ontario Legislature, which is in Toronto, where the family members, victims, and the communities were to come and show respect and have a memorial service for the victims. There were MPs there, and it was well attended. But when it became public that it was going to happen at 12, yesterday the Khalistanis decided at 11:30 they wanted to have their own memorial to the victims, and it was an intimidation tactic.
Of Khalistanis who came to harass, but the Jewish community came out in absolute force to show that we are united against terrorism, Khalistani terrorism, Hamas terrorism, Hezbollah terrorism.
They came in, and I got there early, and we saw them come and try and set up. So I went over to them, and there's a video of me sort of confronting them because, they had T-shirts of Hardip Singh Nijjar, a man who praised the Air India bombing in Tawinder Parmar, the mastermind of all of this. They're pushing conspiracy theories, and I equate this to, if this is a group of neo-Nazis coming with T-shirts of Adolf Hitler and other SS members to a Holocaust memorial site and to pay respects to the victims of the Holocaust and find out the real perpetrators, we wouldn't tolerate this for a second. So that's what happened, and the Khalistanis wanted to set up, and they wanted to do it on the memorial, and there was some negotiation. They tried to pretend they had a permit, even though the other side had a permit, but they kept trying to come closer and closer and closer. But we did get the police and explain the situation to them and force them to do their job, and then the Khalistanis were moved far away from the memorial, and they weren't able to attack or disrupt it from a much further distance. But that's what happened, and then the memorial went off, and it was very well attended. If you've seen the footage, there many different communities came. It wasn't just Hindus and Indians. There were many Jews there. There were Iranian former political prisoners. A couple of them were there, and many different communities. A lot of Canadians were out there to say, enough is enough with all this happening on our streets. We stand united with the victims of terrorism, against terrorism. So that was a nice silver lining of the day.
Daniel, why did you feel the necessity to be there and, sort of remember the Canadians whose lives were lost in this horrible terrorist attack? Why did you feel the need to be there?
It's my duty as a Canadian, as I see it. I think there's two things. It's one, to stand with the victims of terror, which is just the right thing to do, the people who lost their lives. But we are in a point in our society where it has become more than that, where we actually have to stand up and oppose the people that need to do it again. Because there were threats similar to 1984 from Panoon about don't fly Air India today, don't do it, and all these types of threats. And Hindus and the Khalistanis have been running amok, threatening people, making a mess of our streets, general chaos. And it's not just them; they're Hamas and Hezbollah supporters running around terrorizing everyone as well. And it's just that simple for me. It's important to be there, so I was there to show solidarity and send a message to, in this case, the Khalistanis, that if you want to come and attack the victims, you have to get through me and the people around me, the good people of Canada.